Well, guys, for a lot of different reasons, the ninth episode of Wrong Ones with Weston is live, but in a way, it's a good thing, a good experience for us and Dan as well. Plus, you guys will be able to interact with us as we move along. The agenda for this discussion is to discuss all the takeaways from the auction. So before we get started, uh, happy Christmas to everyone who's watching us and. Yep, last episode of the year. So Dan, we'll quickly move to you. How were the holidays? And how are they still going?
Yeah, no, it's really nice. It's actually another public holiday here in the UK because Christmas Day fell on a Sunday, so it's been kind of a long 3 days really. Still, everything sort of gets back to normality tomorrow in England, but I know all good here. I'm a bit struggling a bit with a cold, but it's been really nice to be here sort of with family and stuff over Christmas and see all my family yesterday in particular was great.
Cool. So I hope you have a hot drink with you because we are going to be here for a while.
I certainly do.
All right. So the agenda that we have laid forward is to just talk about every team in the reverse order of where they stood in last season's IPL. So surprise, we will have to start with Mumbai Indians because they finished at the bottom of the table. So Dan, I mean, what were your biggest takeaways from the players that they ended up picking?
Yeah, so I went through all the squads in my pre-auction thread on Twitter. I don't know if you've seen that. Anyone's seen that? That's on my Twitter timeline at SA Advantage, and there were several main areas where I think that Mumbai really needed to strengthen compared to last season. So last season, their middle overs bowling, particularly spin, was a real issue. They kind of had to make do with domestic players who perhaps weren't premium quality, and they sort of chopped and changed a little bit. So having a premium wrist spinner really was, for me, something that they really need to look at in this auction. But they didn't do it, basically. And now it's difficult really to see. Their spin options are still very, very thin on the ground. I thought they would have gone for like an Adil Rashid or an Adam Zampa or something, someone, or even a Rayhan Ahmed, some either premium quality spinner or a spinner with potential, and they didn't do that. So for me, this MI squad now still has a big hole in it in that respect. They decided to blow their budget instead on Cameron Green, who, look, he's a player of high potential. Do I think he's good player? Yes. Do I think he has high potential? Yes. Do I think he's overpriced? Also, yes. And do I think that MI should have spent their money on perhaps some different skill sets? Also, yes, as well. So I also think that the history books will not judge this purchase particularly well, and it wouldn't be surprised for me, at least, if he was released in a year's time. The other key area I think that they needed to look at was a backup for Jofra Archer, given the fact that we're really not sure how fit he might be, and I think they achieved that with a Jai Richardson, very much a sort of like for like type player. Really can hit down the order, can bowl in multiple phases. For me, that made a lot of sense, that purchase, and I think that was a lot more astute than the Cameron Green one.
So I mean, Dan, first things first. Do you think MI have spent 17 crores on a player that might not even be in their best 11, or at least the starting 11?
Or if he makes to the starting 11, who do you leave out? Because I think the last game that they played, they had Brevis, Stubbs, and Tim David in the 11.
Yeah.
So I don't see how all three of them play if Green plays. So who do you leave out?
Well, you have to leave out one of those three batters because they're going to pick either Archer or a replacement in, say, Jai Richardson or one of the other pacers that they've got from the overseas market as their four overseas, aren't they? So it's got to be one of David or the two South African guys who get dropped if Green plays. And if Green doesn't play, they don't really have an abundance of all-rounders either. So it's kind of looks a really tricky balance to to get a nice looking sort of well-rounded team, if you like. So then that's the other thing as well, because if you do play Green, there's a good chance that they're going to bat him at 7, and that's kind of not really where he's done well for Australia either. He's done well opening the
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I can't see MI moving away from the Rohit Sharma Ishan Kishan opening partnership. And so kind of with someone that I know on Twitter, Jack Hope, he posted and he said that Mumbai are a team of 11 ones rather than one team of 11. And I think that makes a lot of sense, actually, in terms of just a lot of individuals. But I don't think the sum of the parts is going to be this as much as the individuals if you added them all together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the way I see it is, I mean, they've spent so much on a player. Now, after spending so much, they'll be bound to try and fit him in the 11. If they do it, like you said, even if they leave out one of the 2 South Africans, that means that they have only one. They can use only one more overseas spot for a bowler, assuming that Green plays, Brevis plays, David plays, and Archer plays. So
Okay,
and they do not have a lot of Indian backups in the bowling options as well. So that again leaves the room. They were already the worst bowling side in last year's tournament.
Yeah.
I if I can come in here, I actually think that they 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 will have to go back to their strategy of playing 2 overseas bowlers like they did in 2019 and 2021, when they actually won 2 titles, because
Yeah.
they don't have any other, proven, or they might have potential pace bowlers, but they don't have anyone proven at this level or with experience at this level. I was very
Mm.
surprised that they did not bid for the likes of Sandeep Sharma, or they did not even try and go for someone like Ishan Porel. So I,
Yeah.
I, I just feel that a lot of their success is going to hinge on Bumrah's and Surya Kumar Yadav's shoulders, because outside of that, uh, everything, because I don't think they're going to drop Tim David. I think both Brevis and Stubbs might miss out of the 11. And
Yeah.
the bigger issue that I see here is that MI could get stuck in the cost of sunk fallacy with someone like Cameron Green, because IPL teams have tended to do that. They sometimes put out the most expensive 11 on the park, and not the most suitable or most balanced 11. So I want to know this from Dan, that how often and how real is this possibility, because you have now worked with the IPL team. Do you think that sometimes teams can actually go and put out the most expensive 11 on the park rather than the most balanced one?
I mean, I wasn't really privy to team selection at PBKs, but what I will say is that I think that that's a definite possibility from the mentality of team management, and also from kind of, if you're looking to manage upwards as well, then if you're a head coach, you're going to achieve a lot less criticism if you play the most expensive 11. If you in terms of the conversations that you might have with the owners, if you've spent a fortune on someone that you've made a massive case for before the auction to the owners, and then you don't pick him, then it's going to make you look like you don't know what you're doing, or you're in a difficult spot. So yeah, I think there is that potential to really pick players on price rather than ability, or how they might fit into the best balanced 11, definitely. And I think that this is a big problem in terms of like the auction format, if you like, which we don't necessarily have in a draft format, where like if you're picking someone and maybe they're like 1 or 2 salary bands higher than someone else, there's not really like that pressure to pick them in, let's say, the 100 that there might be in the IPL, where like a Cameron Green might be 10 or 20 times more expensive than someone else, like a Joe Richardson, for example.
We're getting a lot of questions on Rohit and Dan. This is a topic that you've touched upon a lot of times in the past. Maybe, just maybe, I mean, we don't know. We know over the course of when the tournament begins. Have they bought Cameron Green with an eye towards the future? That Rohit is near to his career's end rather than a start. So at some point of time, he'll have to move on, and there will be a vacancy up top. So probably they are looking at Green from that lens. And even if they are, is Green the right person for that job, and is the amount of money that they've shelled out reflective of that?
Yeah, so first of all, I think Green is a risk, really. I mean, we've only seen him play a few times at a high level for Australia at the top of the order. I still think his bowling is going to be tested at this high level as well in terms of his T20 skills. Yes, he's done well in Test cricket recently, but I think this is a whole different ball game. We haven't seen a lot of him in his own domestic competition, so it's a gamble at the end of the day. It's a huge gamble for big money. Yes, the high reward is potentially there, but it's also a very high risk, and I prefer low risk, high reward rather than high risk, high reward. And as far as that long term replacement for Rohit Sharma, no, I don't think that they bought him specifically with that in mind. I just think that they wanted him as the player, and they'll just shoehorn him in some way, shape, or form. But I think MI would do well to look at that long term replacement for Rohit Sharma, because his performance levels are not getting any better. He's not getting any younger. Something I've talked about a lot is they're going to have to work out how they're going to manage this transition away from Rohit Sharma before it costs them too much. Has that point already happened? Quite possibly, in terms of the time where it's going to start costing them. They've kind of maybe swerved that decision-making process so far, but they can't carry on doing that forever. And I think this is something that the IPL teams really struggle with, and as much as international teams as well, some perhaps to a greater extent, IPL teams struggle with this. Is that this moving away from the legends of the past, if that makes sense? And it's
Yeah, this takes me back to one of the mythbusters that we had done on this episode, where you actually spoken of how experience sometimes can be overrated in terms of this format. Now, I have two questions to ask you. One is, do you think MI can afford another bad season? Because last season, what we saw was that they had spent eight crores on Jofra, they had spent 3 crores on someone like Brevis, and teams rarely spend that much on an under 19 cricketer. And then they had, then they also got stubs. uh, do you think, last season we could say that MI was probably banking on a few potential picks, and hoping that they'll give the reward in the next cycle, and maybe they can afford to spend 8 crores on a player who's not going to be even available for that season? Do you, and now it's been 2 seasons that they haven't qualified for the playoffs. uh, One, do you see them qualify this season? Two, if they don't, do you think, it's going to lead to changes? Because I don't think it has ever happened before that MI has not qualified for playoffs for 3 seasons in a row. They did not qualify for the first 2 seasons, but the third season they actually finished on top of the table. It's And they lost out in the finals. But do you think it could be the first time that MI won't qualify for 3 seasons in a row?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. But there's certainly no guarantees that they're gonna end up in the top four. And obviously, now we know we've seen with the addition of two extra teams, it's that much harder to qualify in the top four now. 4 from 10 rather than 4 from 8. So we're looking at 40% of teams qualifying rather than 50. So that makes it tougher for them. Look, they've also had this management change with Jay Warden sort of stepping aside as head coach, but taking a more sort of directorial role. Look, for me, I think it's all to do with recruitment and that long term strategy. And you can't win a tournament at an auction, but you can go a long way to losing a tournament at an auction. And I felt that their performance in the mega auction in February was really quite curious. And I felt again that they were sort of they didn't maybe the early rounds didn't go for them, and then they had to sort of adapt a little bit. But I felt that they didn't really have a coherent plan that was going to work for them, basically.
Uh,
Mm. Mm.
do you think?
Yeah,
Okay,
no, good,
we'll
good
take
word. Yeah.
Sahil's question first. We'll take Sahil questions first, and then we'll come back to the question that I have, and then we'll move on to the next team.
So Sahil says, why are teams hoarding talent? MI have David, Stubbs, Brevis. LSG have 3 wicketkeeper batsmen. Is it a part of a strategy or purely coincidental?
Yeah, look, I think that's where perhaps sometimes teams are picking up players because they value the player rather than the skill set. So for me, a key part of recruitment is no matter whether it's in the IPL or county cricket or the 100 or whoever you're recruiting for, you have to find a pathway for that player to get into the starting 11. And you don't always see that. So, for example, like CSK for quite a few years had Saikishore, but he was never going to play ahead of Jadeja. So it's also the team's responsibility to work out how they're going to get that player game time as well. Otherwise, it's just a waste of a roster position. It's a waste of money, and it's a waste of that player's talent as well. So, look, MI have Tim David, they have Tristan Stubbs, they have Dwyer Barris, but I think they're going to be likely to play at least 2 out of 3. So it's reasonable for them to have those 3 because at most one of them is probably going to be cover, and you can understand it from that perspective. It's when players are hoarded and they don't, especially young players, and they don't get the opportunity, and they would probably start for another franchise instead. That's when I think it's more sad.
One last question before we move on to the next team. Dan, do you think that the impact player rule can help MI in some way or the other? Do you think they have enough Indian talent to make use of it?
So the curveball just before the auction was the announcement that unless you're not playing your full quota of overseas players, the impact player is going to have to be a domestic player. And I think that it's going to be fascinating to see who adapts quickly to these impact rules. So the only time the only league we've ever seen these type of things in is the Big Bash, and not just to talk about the impact sub or what I think they called it. I don't know I can't remember what they called it in the Big Bash, but they also had like the Bash Boost, which was whichever team had the most runs after 10 overs got an extra point, and stuff like floating power play as well. What I found was that in the Big Bash, teams didn't adapt very quickly to these new rules, and they left a lot of competitive advantage on the table. So it'll be fascinating to see which IPL teams actually do adapt quicker and take advantage of the other team's disorganisation. Now, for me, this goes back to something someone spoke about Sandeep Sharma earlier. This is kind of like what a bit of a surprise as to why he went on sole, really, because I think a power play specialist is one of the areas where you can see an impact sub having some difference in terms of, okay, you get maybe 3 overs out of them up top, then you get them off for a death bowler or a batter or something like that. Like that's where you can get a lot of flexibility. But on the whole, I do expect kind of phase specialists or skill set specialists. You know, like a intent merchant. Like you can see like someone like Abdul Samad being a really interesting impact player for Sunrisers, for example, because you've got this guy who's going to tee off from ball 1, and maybe he might not always feature in a starting 11, but he's a great option to bring off the bench if they really need quick runs. So I'm fascinated to see how this is going to play out, to be honest with you. I think it's a really good rule, and I'm generally more in favour of innovation in this kind of respect than kind of keeping the status quo as it is.
So Basta Parida from our team at cricket.com did an interview with Sandeep Sharma as well, and it's on our app and website. So guys watching us, do check that out. Dan, since we have touched the topic of impact player, before we move on to the next team, I just have one question. As an analyst, how would you approach it? Do you think of it as a 12-member team now, or do you think that play your best 11 and use the impact substitution rule only in case of an emergency?
Yeah, and this is such an interest. This is why I can't wait to see how this plays out in reality. Is that what I would do is I would probably pick my best 11 suited for the venue, the conditions, the opposition, etc. And then you have 4 players of various skill sets on the bench who can take advantage of depending on how the game develops. You know, if you lose 3 wickets in a power play, you might want to bring another batter in. If you're I don't know, really up against it with 6 overs to go with the bat, you need like maybe 85 off the last 6 overs. You bring in the intent merchant, like stuff like that. These things are just absolutely fascinating. But for me, it's clear that these players have got to be either phase specialists or point of difference players. It's no good really, you know, having like I don't know, plucking a name out of the air like a Manish Pandey or something on the bench, because it doesn't really change the dynamic of the match. It's got to be someone who can have like a short-term influence in the match, if that makes sense.
Fair enough.
Perfect.
I think now we move on to the next team, and since we are going in the reverse order, I think it's CSK or is it KKR?
CSK.
Yes.
CSK.
I wanted to confirm because I with CSK fans I never want to risk anything and I want to make sure
Yeah,
that
yeah.
they don't get offended.
One of the rare seasons where the tables were turned and MI and
Yeah,
CSK actually were bottom.
truly. Now, Dan, now that we have to talk about CSK, we have to talk about someone like Ben Stokes. We saw that CSK were trying to go after someone like Sam Curran. They
Yeah.
couldn't, and then they went for Ben Stokes. Uh, how do you think Ben Stokes fits into their 11? Because if you see their first 11 or the 11 that played the last time, their overseas spots were more or less fixed with Conway, Moin Ali, Pretorius, and one of Tikshana or Patirana. So who goes out if Stokes comes in? That's the most important question, I think.
Yeah, so I think there's several ways you can structure it up. I think he could look to potentially open ahead of a Devon Conway, for example, or also he comes in as an all rounder, but bats basically anywhere in the top seven. Comes in for say a Pretorius or something like that. I think they're going to need a Tikshana in their group. I think that with him and Jadeja, and then the matchup options for Marinelli as well. They've got spin really nicely covered in that group. And that's kind of how I see it. Really, I think either opening or as an all rounder would be most logical. Stokes' numbers against spin aren't great. He's going to play presumably half his matches in Chapok as well, which is not ideal for him either. So, I mean, personally, I think he's got a lot to prove. Personally, I think that he was overpriced, but it was obvious that was going to happen in advance of the auction, if that makes sense.
So do you think CSK will alternate between him and Conway at home and away? Maybe all Chepauk games Conway plays and all away games maybe Stokes play?
No, I think that they'll play Stokes regardless. I think that this is, again, a nod back to what we were talking about a little earlier about players being picked with a price tag in mind as well. I mean, I personally, I think that any team who picks Ben Stokes is going to play them in every game, and this is again, this is something that you've got to rationalise before you raise that paddle for the first time, basically.
Yeah.
Now,
So that means Pretorius misses out.
Yeah.
Because Moin and Conway will have to play, and if Pretorius misses out,
I think if they leave out Pretorius, then death bowling becomes a concern. I actually think what could happen is that in Chepauk, because Conway's game against spin is also quite good. We saw how Conway, in that first game of this World T20, how Conway's handled Zampa very well. I think what it's going to come down to is who plays between Moin Ali and Pretorius depending upon conditions. I think it's going to come down to that because Tikshana will play. I feel Tikshana will definitely play, and if they feel that they really need some meat in the death pooling, then they might play Pretorius and might leave out Moin Ali. Also, I feel somewhere MS Dhoni would be hoping that the uncapped pacers like Mukesh Chaudhary's, Simarjeet Singh's, and Tushar Pandey, they probably take a step further. And also, if you look at if Deepak Chahar's back, I think what they'll try and do is try and have the opposition 5 down by the 15th, 16th over, so that the damage at the death is minimized in some way or the other.
So when we talk in general, when this is out in the open now that KKR is a team that has struggled against pace, but it just went under the radar that CSK actually had the worst run rate against pace in last season. Do you think just an addition of Stokes covers for that? Because Raidu, Gaikwad, and even Jadeja had below average numbers last season, and these are predominantly their starters this season as well.
So I don't see that Stokes really changes a lot in that respect, actually, and this is why I kind of questioned the purchase. It was for me, it's almost like a purchase based on what he's done in other formats. Really, I think is and the name. I don't see him ticking off the problems that they have. So for me, their death bowling, as we've just spoken about, is a big red flag, and they haven't done anything to really solve that issue either. So look, this is where sometimes I think teams they look at the name rather than they look at the what they actually have to improve. And you know, if CSK have like a bowling attack of a pace bowling attack of Deepak Chahar, Mukesh Chowdhury, and I don't know Shivam Dubey or something like that. I mean, where's the death bowling coming from? They've got spinners from Chana, Jadeja,
I mean, in CSK's, then I get your point, but in CSK's defense, I want to bring this up that they tried to get Karan, they couldn't. They also tried quite hard to get someone like Jason Holder,
Mhm.
who actually with his cutters could have been quite effective
Yep.
in Chepauk. I know he doesn't have great numbers at death, but Chepauk is also not your standard T20 pitch. It gets actually very difficult to bat on that wicket as the
Yep.
match goes on. And someone like Holder, who has so much experience of playing on the slow and low tracks of Caribbean, would have been quite handy. So I think they tried to look for options which would have at least sorted their death bowling at home. But I just think that things couldn't fell apart from that. Things couldn't fall in place for them.
Mm, I have sympathy for that, but I do also think um I would have paid quite happily paid the same for Holder as I would have paid for Stokes. Not that I'm saying that Holder's worth that money, but I'm saying that I don't feel that Stokes offers a great deal more than Holder in this particular format. Maybe a bit more with the bat. Holder, I think, a fair bit more with the ball. So look, I think they did have options there. But yeah, no, I take your point. I mean, and this is the whole problem with this all-rounder market was that there was always going to be such a competition for players, and there was only going to be sort of 2 or 3 teams who could really afford the marquee guys.
Yeah,
And
fair
but
enough.
this is one question which is bound to be there, given a middle order of or a top six of potentially having Stokes,
Conway,
Shivam Dube,
Shivam Dube.
Jadeja, Moeen Ali, and Conway. So Dan, I mean, you always said it's better to have more left-handers and more right-handers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So about 75% of batters are right-handed. So yeah, a few left-handers, particularly on a venue that assist spin might be quite useful for them. Look, with CSK, we've done this so many times. I'm sure you guys have done this before on shows. It's so easy to write them off before the start. So easy to say that they're brilliant and curious, but then they seem to be able to magic out one more year of performances. So it'll be fascinating to see what they do. I mean, personally, I don't think that their plans are great, but yeah, let's see.
Gurkha, you're on mute.
Sorry, this happens quite a lot often with me. One last question before we move on. What do you make of the Kyle Jamieson buy? Because the one season that Kyle Jamieson has had in the IPL, it
Mm.
wasn't a great one, and he actually did play a few games in Chepauk in the first half of 2021 IPL. Do you think it's a buy because maybe CSK feel that if they play on venues like Wankhede, maybe some to maybe Eden Gardens to some extent, and maybe Chepauk, maybe Chinnaswamy, that his height could be a factor in terms of bowling because uh, he doesn't make the New Zealand squad as well. So I want to understand from you that what could be the logic of selecting someone like Kyle Jamieson.
Well, obviously, there's the New Zealand connection with Stephen Fleming as head coach already, so you would imagine that the two players, the player and coach, are known to each other. I think Jameson offers some useful skill sets. Obviously, the height is a point of difference, and at his best, I think that we've seen that teams did compete for him in previous auctions at big prices. Um, One of my notes of CSK was they needed another bowler who can bat, and so they've picked him up, and he can do that as well. So I think it's a bit like the Jai Richardson purchase for MI in that you're picking up what some people describe as a distressed asset, if you like, where you've got someone who's previously shown ability, previously shown potential, been bid on, and then got for vast sums, and then got released, and then they're being picked up now cheaply with a view to trying to help them realise that form of potential, if you like. So, I mean, I don't mind the Kyle Jameson purchase at all, really. I think that in terms of risk, that's the low risk potential, high reward that could be achieved. Whereas, obviously, Stokes or Cameron Green is high risk, high reward.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we'll quickly move on to the next team, and as per the order, it's the Sunrisers Hyderabad. So Dan, there is just a common perception after the auction that Sunrisers emerged as the best team among all in terms of the buys that they made. Do you agree, or do you have different thoughts?
Yeah, I think that they were probably a little bit smarter than they were last year. I don't know if that was the impact of Brian Lara coming in, whether it was the impact of Gaurav Sundaraman coming in as an analyst. I don't know. I remember last year, and I felt that they didn't really have a plan, and there was certainly, despite being one of the biggest stacks in the latter stage of day one and also day two of the mega auction, they were kind of pushed around by teams and quite surprisingly pulled out of bidding quite high when they had the most money already. And I just felt that their auction strategy last year in February was really quite confused. I think this time they looked to see what didn't work for them in the 2022 season, and they've tried to rectify that. So you have to give them credit for that. So 3 key areas that I think that they needed to look at. One was batting enforcement, particularly with a nod to intent merchants. Intent merchants and the Sunrisers Hyderabad tend not to be mentioned in the same sentence. And I'm not sure that they really ticked off the intent merchant bracket, but Harry Brook is certainly a player of rich potential, although again looks very overpriced, especially for a kind of a single skill set batter, if you like, as in doesn't bowl. Mayank Agarwal, another distressed asset, and I think that's a smart pickup from them because Indian batters of high quality, proven quality, in this mini auction was so thin on the ground. So that any team who picked up Agarwal for ballpark 50% of his previous price was getting a decent result. And then the weird one was Heinrich Klaassen, who I didn't really even have on a list of players likely to be sold, and then went for over 5 crore. So I mean, personally, I don't think they got it all right. They ticked off the batting reinforcement box to a large extent. So you can look at their batting order now, and you think that okay, Abhishek, Mayank Agarwal, Tripathi, Markram, Brook, Phillips or Klaassen or something like that, and it's like a non-disastrous top 6. Whereas I think some of their squads last year were really quite questionable. They also really needed a high-quality leg spinner because they had this incredible brain fade the year before where they thought that they could replace Rashid Khan with Shreyas Gopal, and it didn't work out, unsurprisingly. And they did bring in the reinforcements in that area. So Adil Rashid is the overseas option, and while maybe jury's out on him as a IPL starter, Mayank Markande comes in as a domestic replacement. What I also was quite interested to see, and I kind of predicted this on my Twitter mega thread actually, was the West Indian connection between Lara and Akil Hussain. So him coming in as well, and I'm really interested to see Hussain at this level because I've spoken to quite a lot of coaches about him, and my numbers actually really quite rate this guy, and visually I like the way that he plays as well. decent phase flexibility in terms of power play operating, and almost quite a unique power play bowling style as well. And yeah, some of the coaches that I've spoken to really not sold on him. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how he goes at this higher level, and he adds a little bit with the bat as well, so that helps, I suppose, to some degree. However, it's not all glory for Sunrise. I do feel that they could have looked at another death bowler at least, and they haven't done that. So they've gone in with kind of five paces really, 6 if you count Mark Jansen's all rounder. But I mean, Mark Jansen's very, very unproven still at T20 level. Red Bull cricket, his numbers are excellent, but still hasn't proven. He's not proven quantity by any means in T20. So, and of those bowlers, Natarajan and Bhuvneshwar Kumar have had injury problems as well. So, it's having a little bit more reinforcement for me would have been quite nice. But they've gone with kind of what they had pre-auction in the face department.
I was just coming to the spin department that you brought up about Adil Rashid and Akil Hussain being there. I think both of them are massive upgrades over Shreyas Gopal and Jagdisha Suchit, and Akil Hussain is also capable of a couple of big hits. Uh, so I think I actually think that. And coming to Klassen, I felt that teams are going to bid for him primarily because uh, back in 2018, when batters all over the world were struggling to pick the likes of Kuldeep and Chahal from the hand, he was still attacking them and doing quite well against them. And even against India earlier this year, when South Africa had come to play the T20I series, uh, Klassen was again batting pretty well on a slow pitch in Cuttack. And South Africa were 3 down in the power play, and from there on, Klassen actually finished off the game for them. So uh, I think Klassen could have been an excellent buy for a team like Chennai, or even a team like KKR, because KKR anyway needed someone who could have they anyway needed a keeper who could have played pace well in the middle order especially. And then I think Chennai, with the conditions that they have in Chepauk, I thought Klassen would have been a very, very good pick, because they didn't really have a lot of batters who could have played pace well. I think there's only Conway and there's Jadeja.
Hmm. Yeah. So one other thing that I observed about SRH last season was they were pretty impatient with their bowling lineup. They chopped and changed their bowling attack a lot. Maybe that is something. Given that they did not release anyone, they still continue to do that. Most of their 5 to 6 pacers that they relied on, maybe under new management, that is something that I really want to see them do. Actually, just stick with a pace attack and try to see where it goes, because I feel in terms of domestic talent, SRH have the in combination they have the best domestic pace attack. Dan, I mean, do you agree, or do you feel any other sides have better Indian pace attack?
Look, I look at the Sunrisers pace bowling group, and I think that domestically, I think that Bhuvneshwar Kumar is still a strong player. Maybe not quite at his peak of his powers, but he's still a strong option. Tyaghi's upside. Umran Malik is someone who I'm quite polarized about compared to other people. A lot of people see the pace, the excitement, the stumps flying everywhere. I see high boundary percentage conceded, and kind of an erratic bowler at this point in time who doesn't really bowl effectively outside the middle overs. So for me, there's a bit of a difference of opinion there on Malik, and Natarajan, death over specialist, but has had a lot of injuries. So I look, it's decent, but I don't think it's tournament winning. I don't think it's anything that's
So how does that their 11 look like to you, Dan, at this point of time?
the starting 11. And this is where you can look at kind of a impact sub scenario where I think when I sort of mentioned the potential top 6 earlier, Abhishek, Mayank Agarwal, Rahul Tripathi, Markram 4 or 5, Brook at 4 or 5, Phillips or Klassen as the keeper, and then you've got Washington Sundar, who, yes, he says he's working on his hitting, but in a scenario where SRH bowl first, he bowls his quota, and then they need some quick runs lower down the order, could he be subbed out for an Abdul Samad, for example, like that? And that's where having those point of difference players, I think, is going to be really, really interesting. I do think they have to play either Hussain or Rashid as an overseas spinner. I don't think they have any option but to do that. So they're going to have to structure up in that respect. And then it's kind of that means it's probably 3 out of the domestic pace group, and that means that it's going to be tough to fit in Marco Jansen or Fazal Faruqi into the bowling lineup.
If just one last question before we move on, if say their Indian pace attack is not working out, because Bhuvneshwar Kumar in the last IPL actually was bowling well at the death, but his death bowling tapered off completely in T20 internationals, and Natarajan actually had an economy of around 11 in the last 5 overs in the last IPL. If they do have to play one overseas pacer, who would you play between Faruqi and Jansen?
Faruqi is
My choice would be Faruqi, because
Yeah.
I think Jansen's more of a power play bowler, and Bhuvneshwar Kumar can do that role.
100%. Yeah, Faruqi is a 2-2 bowler, I call him, a 2 power play, 2 death bowler. You don't get that from Jansen. Jansen, people might be sold on the extra batting depth that he provides, but I think in this situation you want to pick the better bowler, and I think that's, at this point in time, Faruqi is the more proven quantity by quite a long distance.
And before we move on to the next team, I just want to let the viewers know that before the IPL, we had spoken of a few uncapped players that could have been picked, and Anirudh Kasargod, our statsman, had actually done an article on these players, and he had mentioned Sanveer Singh, and I think the other is Samarth Vyas. I think both these players have been bought by Sunrisers Hyderabad, and very good numbers at the domestic level. So I think one of them along with Samad would actually be uh, four players who could one of two of those 4 players who could be impact player substitutions.
Perfect. Yeah. With that, we move to the next team, which is KKR. Dan, do you feel they overperformed last season? I'm just looking at the reverse order. I just somehow felt that we are pretty late talking about Kolkata.
Do you know what? I think that their batting really let them down last year, and Bazball, if you like, certainly didn't work in the IPL in 2022. They had a really bad batting stability as a group, and certainly struggled in the power play in particular. And with that, in conjunction with difficulties with their death bowling, was probably the biggest hurdles that they faced last season. Now, moving forward, they did a lot of their business pre-auction with Charles Tucker, Gurbars, and Lockie Ferguson, all coming into the group. So they were never going to be prolific at auction in terms of the amount that they could spend, and so they still picked up, I think, some players who can help them in terms of the areas that they needed to improve. So I looked at them and I thought that they needed another keeping option, and they've kind of ticked off that box with KS Bharat.
With Jagdishan, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I got the wrong one. Sorry, yeah, wrong note. Sorry, yeah, Jagadish. Sorry, and then Litton Das as well is kind of a backup option as well. Although again, I think with Litton Das, it's a bit like one of the comments we had. I think it was Anirudh a few minutes ago, talking about performances against India, and I do think that Litton Das benefited from that tax, if you like, in terms of you play well against India, and somehow those runs are worth more in the IPL auction a lot of the time. So so they brought in the keeper batter, and they also, I thought, they needed a backup all rounder. and they did that with David Visa and Shakib Al Hassan offering different skill sets as well. I also thought the bowling generally needed improvement, and they didn't really do a lot with it. I don't see Kulwant Khojwalia as a starter, but Vihab Aurora, who I mean, he had a mixed bag of performances, I think, for PBKs last season, but has ability, certainly in the power play, looks an interesting pickup as well, so to reinforce the domestic bowling stocks. So, yeah, I think they looked a little bit to kind of pick up some players who could improve them. Not sure Gurbaz will do much for their stability. He's certainly a kind of a Bazball player, if you like. But yeah, generally, you can kind of see where they were going a little bit at auction. Although, I'd say with such a low purse, it was really difficult for them to make big purchases.
So, I mean, what did you think of the pre-auction business that they did? They bought Shardul. They spent a lot on Shardul and Lockheed.
Yeah. So Lockheed, I understand because I think that there was a good chance that he would have been bid up quite high at auction. Maybe not as far as 10, but I understand why they would pick him up before the auction and take that risk out of the equation. And we saw that premium players were really highly valued at mini auction this year. So you can kind of see the logic there. Gurbaz was an absolute steal. I still can't understand why he was let go. And Thakur, I think, was a good trade for DC rather than KK. I mean, I'm not sold on Shardul Thakur as a T20 player because you're looking at him as kind of. I don't even see him necessarily as a 4-over bowler, and I don't see him as a premium phase bowler in terms, the guys who can use bankers in power play or death, for example. And I don't see his hitting is of a good enough standard to kind of overcome those bowling deficiencies. So I kind of see this guy as someone who is not quite good enough to get in the team as a batter or a bowler a lot of the time, but because he offers a bit of both, he kind of gets a lot of love. But the problem is that you can't pay 10 or 11 crore for that type of player. And I've seen some teams, sort of sample teams, suggested where he's batting at 7. That's horrible. He's not a number 7 at this level. There's any debate about that. So let's see. I'm okay with the 2 trades in with Ferguson and Gurbaz, but less so for Thakur.
Maybe do you think it's possible for KKR to maybe use Shardul as a pinch hitter, like how they've used Narayan, especially against pace, because Narayan's pace pinch hitting or hitting the ball is very good.
Yeah, I think you got the
Sorry,
gist of the question. So.
my net actually went off.
Yeah, well, they've already got Narayan who can do that, so I don't really see why they would want to go down a Thakur route. And personally, I mean, for a player to pinch hit, I think they've got to be able to have a low value on their wicket, which I think he does have. But I also think that you want someone who can, have high boundary percentage or ability to hit over the infield on a consistent basis. And I'm not sure that Thakur is really that type of player. I want someone who's more like intent merchant, someone who's going to hit aerially a bit more. I'm not sure he's that guy.
Yeah. Any possibility do you see maybe Liton Das playing ahead of someone like Gurbaz? I know he's not been keeping the gloves in recent times, but say if Gurbaz is not scoring runs, who do they replace Gurbaz with in the first 11? Is it Shakib, or is it, because if Liton is not going to keep gloves, then they'll have to play someone like Jagdishan.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different combos I think that KKR can bring in. So you can have Jagadish as a keeper, and then you could play Liton Das as just a batter, or you can they've got so many all rounders. Visa, Shakib, Russell, Narayan. There are a lot of combos that they can play. I think that it's going to be really interesting to see it, but the problem is that they could chop and change quite a lot as well. someone fails for 2 games and someone else gets to go, and it's quite difficult to predict their best team. I think on this situation. Personally, I mean, I think Gabars could be a potential superstar, and his ceiling's really really high, but he doesn't really address the stability issues from last season, which perhaps Littendas or Jagadish can do more. But if you ask me who's going to be the best player in 5 years' time and go for the most money in the auction in 5 years' time, we go back by a mile. So it all depends already on the reason why players are recruited. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about always having that pathway to being selected. I mean, you can't just pick a player and then not have a clue how you're going to use them. You have to pick a player and think, okay, well, this is how they're going to feature regularly in the starting 11 if it all turns out well. And this is kind of, you look at this KKR team and you think, okay, well, without Gurbars, without David Visa, with Russell, if Russell's injured or not playing well, where's the hitting coming from? There's a lot of 125, 130 strike rate guys in that team. Like Nitish Rana, Shreyas Iyer, Jagadish never really shown. Yes, he's done well domestically recently, but he's never shown a high ceiling at IPL level before. Venkatesh Iyer still has something to prove too. Shakib Al Hassan is not a hitter. So there are various ways that they can structure up, and I think that this KKR, how they select their teams and their strategy is going to dictate so much for them in this competition. I don't think a lot of the teams that you look at now and you think, okay, well, it's pretty easy to pick a core group of 15 or starting 11. I'm not sure that it is with KKR. So yeah, there's 18 players who could conceivably play a reasonable amount.
My feeling is that KKR's team might be the most most ill suited to their home venue because of the kind of pitch or the venue Eden Gardens is. I don't think that their bowling is good enough for that venue, because you need very very good bowlers for that venue, and you need a lot of batters who can play short of or back of length quite well. And I think uh, they don't have an option for that. They'll probably need someone like Rinku Singh to have a great season to probably ensure that they're consistently posting scores upwards of 180, especially while playing at Eden. And I don't think scores upward of 180 are safe. I don't think even scores of upwards of 200 are safe at Eden. So 180 may not even cut it if they're batting at Eden Gardens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is where exactly I felt that someone like a Will Smith could be a good buy for them, even from a future perspective. But they had other ideas. But though I still feel that Gurbaz ought to start for them, because they clearly struggled against pace, and at least Gurbaz has that intent against pace and decent numbers to go with it. Moving on, Dan. Next team is, of course, some team close to your
Punjab
heart, which
Kings.
is Punjab. Uh, yeah. Overall, how what did you feel about their auction? You said ahead of the auction that you wish that they do not move on from the strategy that you guys initiated.
Yeah.
What did you feel once the auction got over?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Sam Curran was the really obvious pick for PBKs in terms of just ticks all the boxes of what they really needed. Someone who can, another left-hander who can play spin well or hit spin well is useful. A batter who can bat anywhere in the top 7, and someone who can bowl across multiple phases as well is just gold dust. And PBKs did go all out for Sam Curran, and look, it was a lot of money, but it does look like he really balances up the team so well. So you can understand that. The rest of the purchase, I think, were really all squad players. Really, just a few domestics and Sikandar Raza. Raza, I mean, maybe he's like kind of a backup for Livingston, although I think they're quite different type of players. But you can kind of see where they've gone there a little bit. What disappointed me a little bit with Punjab was the pick 7, only pick 7 overseas rather than 8, because 40 or 50 luck you can get a Will Smeed or you can get a Rehan Ahmed, and yeah, they might not play for you that much this year, but you're integrating them into your franchise, you're not necessarily buying them for now. You're buying them for their future value. And I think that was a little bit short-sighted from the franchise to not go and maximise their all-rounder quota with the highest potential young player, basically.
Yeah, and here we have a team called Mumbai who've spent 25 crores across 2 auctions for players who are not going to play for them this season.
Dan, I want to understand from you something. And this has become a pattern with Punjab, because last season as well, they were left with a decent amount of budget. After this auction, they've been left with 12 crores, and I think last season they were again left with around 10 crores, if I'm not wrong. And
Yes.
before that season as well, I've consistently seen that Punjab don't try and save around 10%, or if not 10 crores, at least 10% of the budget that is there with the team, or of the purse rather. Uh, is this something that is coming up from the higher management, or is it just a coincidence? Because like you said,
So,
uh, like you said, it's they only had 7 overseas players, and they could have gone for one more.
just to summarize Gurkira's question, do you think the management is frugal?
Look, I think that any team who takes a decision not to try and maximise their purses is constraining themselves in advance of a tournament. I mean, if you're regardless of who you are, I mean, let's just look at Punjab Kings, for example. If you're a team who struggled to consistently qualify over the duration of the IPL, particularly in recent years, you can't give the opposition a head start. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So certainly, kind of a preordained strategy where you're not going to spend your whole purse looks to be very, very questionable in terms of strategy. Do I think that they went into auctions with that deliberate intention? No, I don't. But I do think that once you get current and it's in this situation, it's quite easy just to say, okay, well, we've checked out, we've got the player we want.
Hmm. We'll take one. This was the first comment before we even began the show. Dan, how do you think they'll line up? Will Besto start? Because as I see it, probably Rajapaksa is the one who unfortunately will have to miss out to fit Sam Curran. Do you think the same, or do you think otherwise?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, obviously, Manuka had a good tournament last year. Struggled a bit in the Lanka Premier League. Didn't set the world on fire in the World Cup apart from one performance. But I do think that he's a player who deserves another crack at the IPL after a really, really promising first season. However, yeah, it does look like Sam Curran will come in for him. Now, in terms of that batting order, I think it's fascinating to see how it's going to play out. I think Bairstow and Dhawan look the likely openers, which is a left right combo, and perhaps Bairstow the more attacking option of the two. So there's complementary skill sets there that make a lot of sense. I would then play Liam Livingston at number 3. I personally would look to try and bat him as high up the order as possible. You've got a player who's a match winner. You want him to face as many balls as possible, and just I've never really understood how some country, England and some other teams, you use him at like sort of 5, 6, 7, and it's just a waste of someone's extraordinary talent. And then there's options. So you can structure up quite differently. You can structure up with like a Prab, perhaps Imran Singh, or if you want a left-hander, Tavaide in the batting. You could also look to play Jitesh Sharma at 4 as well. Jitesh obviously going to play anyway, I would have thought. Sam Curran as well can bat anywhere in that top 6 or 7 as well. So there's options there, and you can. What I like about this is that with Dhawan, with Sam Curran, with a Tide if he plays as well, you can do a lot with left-handers and kind of messing up the opposition in terms of their potential bowling templates and stuff as well. So there was a game last year that Punjab went left in play against CSK, and Santner and Jadeja didn't bowl out, and the CSK were really, really concerned about bowling them against the two left-handers in tandem. So there's a lot of things you can do to sort of screw up other teams' matchup plans with such a flexible batting lineup. So personally, I'm not a big fan of like a 1 to 7 or 1 to 11 batting order anyway. So it's just kind of a group really who can contribute in different phases, at different entry points as the match warrants. The other option is the other choice is whether you play Shah Rukh Khan as kind of like a luxury player, 6 or 7 as a kind of a hitter who doesn't bowl. He struggled a little bit last year. I think it's pretty reasonable to say. I think he probably underwhelmed a lot of people's expectations. Can he do it this year? Let's see. And then there's the other choice of going a bit more bowler heavy with like a Rishi Dhawan as a number 7, who's less of a hitter but provides more of a bowling option. So there's options regardless anywhere in that top 7, and then there's a little bit of batting afterwards as well with the likes of Rahul Chahar, Rabada, and if he plays Harpreet Brar as well.
Okay, so one question that I want to ask you is, Prerak Mankad was a part of the squad last time around. He's also a batting all round option and bats around at 5 and 6 for in the domestic circuit. Uh,
Yep.
do you think it was a good option? It was a good decision to release him, because I genuinely feel that someone like him could have been used at number 7, maybe instead of Rishi Dhawan, because you
Yes.
have Livingston also who can give you 2 overs. So I want to know your thoughts on that one. The other question is, Shikhar Dhawan's now 36.
Mhm.
Do you think it's an extremely short-sighted call to make him the captain?
Okay, so we'll go with the Prerak Mankad question to start with. Yes, I agree with you actually, Gokara. I think that it was a no-brainer to retain him at such a low cost, unless he didn't want to be retained himself, which is obviously something that we don't know about. It makes sense to retain a player who's done very well domestically at 20 lakh, I think it was. He was really underpriced, I felt, in February auction. And I was really surprised that teams weren't interested in him in this auction as well. And so domestic all-rounders who have done well consistently in domestic tournaments are quite thin on the ground. So for me, it made a lot of sense just to keep him, and I'm sure he could have contributed in some areas. With regards to Shikhar Dhawan, yeah, I do have a concern there a little bit. The age is one thing. We're also seeing, I think, in ODIs as well as T20s, a drop off in strike rate, which is pretty concerning, I would say, for a high price ticket player who is now captain as well. So for me, I'm always looking at future strategies and future proofing decisions, and I look at this PBK's group now, and I think, okay, well, let's say Dhawan has a horrible season and he's really declined, and they didn't want to get rid of him. Who do they bring in as captain? Who can they have as captain out of this group? There's not really a captaincy option among these players at all. Maybe you could ask Bairstow to do it, but it's not ideal in the slightest to have an overseas captain who hasn't really done the job that often before. And again, you're forced into this view where you're going to have to bring in a captain externally potentially, and kind of then you're back to square one in that rebuilding process again. So, yeah, look, I hear those concerns completely, and yeah, I think they're very valid points.
The fans are already getting worried. They've lost count of number of captains Punjab has had. So we will take Anirudh's question. This is something.
Before we take, I think Dan's choice will be Ellis, but I still want to hear out why.
And I think this is where you have a price tag and reputation versus format ability discussion is we've kind of had those discussions already a little bit today, and we'll see that again. I rate Nathan Ellis super high. He was part of a very strong Hampshire team in T20 Blast, They're probably the best bowling group in the tournament, and I think single-handedly really did a lot to improve London's spirit in the 100 last season. Just to have a banker, a death option for them was just a complete change in terms of bringing them from bottom of the league up to qualification. Was just such a massive help for them. Look, in an ideal world, you play them both. And these are the problems that you face when you've got 4 overseas players and you've kind of got Sam Curran, Ronnie Bairstow, and Liam Livingstone as 3 of them. So, look, ultimately, I do see it as Anirudh says, it's a decision between Rabada and Ellis as opposed to kind of somehow fitting both of them into a team. But I guess that's a nice problem to have in some degree. Like the fact that personally, I would say that Nathan Ellis would greatly benefit most other franchises is a nice problem. Shows that Punjab's a nice problem to have.
Though before today, I could have said this with a lot more certainty that if you're playing against DC and Warner, maybe play Rabada. But I mean, after today, I can't even put that argument. So, do we have any other questions on Punjab before we move ahead?
No, I think now we should move on to the team that gives me a lot of grief.
Yeah. So from one
one connection to another.
One connection to the other. From Punjab, we move to Gurkirats, Delhi. Dan, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah. I think that they didn't really reinforce the squad in the right areas, to be honest with you. I looked at the notes that I had for them. Were middle overs hitting. They needed to improve power play bowling and then middle over bowling. And the notes that I wanted them to look at for recruitment wise were a top quality wrist spinner, because I still think Kuldeep Yadav is not quite there, and it still has plenty to prove at this level. And I wanted them to buy a 2-2 pacer, what I call 2-2 pacer, like a 2 power play, 2 death pacer. And I don't really think that they did any of that. So, I look at their team now, and I think it's going to be very, very similar to last season. And there's looking at the players they bought in, Phil Salt, well, he's going to be backup keeper, and DC have done this a few times with keepers. I think they had Tim Seifert last year. They've had Sam Billings before as well as a sort of like squad overseas keeper.
Before that, there was Alex Carey.
Yeah. So there's been a real theme of this. So I don't. Phil Salt, I think, would have been better served going to another franchise. Maybe like a
KKR.
or one of the new 2 teams or something like that would have been a good option.
Maybe could have been a good replacement backup for someone like Matthew Wade, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of Kane Williamson.
Yes, yeah, exactly that. And then looking at the other players that they brought in, I just don't really see how they fit into the team. Manish Pandey, how is he going to play? What role is he going to have? Does he fight out for Sarfaraz Khan at 5? But he's not really a 5. So I don't really see that. Riley Rousseau, I rate pretty highly. So he might be the only one I think that really comes in, and I think a lot of that's going to be down to the fitness of Mitchell Marsh. Although I would go, a lot of people seem to be thinking that the Mitchell Marsh and Robin Powell are like guaranteed starters, but I don't see that either. I think that both of them are not necessarily fantastic options at this level. Powell, I watched Ron Powell play so many times, even at T10 level, and this guy's got so much power. It's scary what this guy could actually do, but he has like this strange mentality with it. But his first 10 balls just likes to play forward defensives, and it's not like he's even really looking to get his eye in. It's just like a feeling bat on ball kind of thing. It's really quite strange, and I think if you could kind of get him to choose better options at the start of his innings, then he could be much more of an asset. So that would be how I would look to try and work with Rotherham and Powell anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think, and again, you've got a long tail potentially as well with Akshar at 7, and not a great deal in terms of the all rounder balance from there on
Yeah.
either. So
Mm.
look, I think it's
No, no, no Shardul as well this time around.
If I
yeah,
can,
no,
if I
that's
can,
not an issue to me. But yeah,
if
yeah,
if I
I
can,
don't see it as that much different.
if I can come in here, they have 9 players in their squad of 25 who are essentially top three batters. There is Shaw, there is Warner, there is Pant, there is Phil Salt, there is Rousseau, there is Mitchell Marsh, and there is
Manish
Sarfaraz
Pandey.
and Manish Pandey. So there are 9 players in a squad of 25 who are top three batters, and out of those 9, 4 are overseas batters.
Yeah.
So
And
half
only
of
one
your,
is an all-rounder.
yes, given how many hamstring issues Marsh has had, as a DC fan, I'd never want Marsh to be bowling anyway. Uh,
So
Even if
no
he
one of them
provides
is
the
an
bowling.
all-rounder.
Uh, Apart from this, like Anirudh is saying, they don't have a backup. I mean, they have a backup for namesake because they do have two other spinners, who were in the squad last time in Praveen Dubey and Vicky Oswal. Praveen Dubey did play a game for DC in 2020 IPL, and yeah, 2020 IPL. So he's been with the squad since that time. And Vicky Oswal is someone who actually played the Under 19 World Cup for India. I think earlier this year, or yeah. So I mean, I don't think they made an attempt to buy those bowlers. They bought Ishan Sharma. Again, there were better bowlers available uh, in the local market, and then they've gone for someone like Mukesh Kumar, who I think, because he was the net bowler for them, they actually see something in his potential. But this is where I think that Klaasen would have been a very good pick for them, because he could have been. Uh, I think he plays spin better than both Marsh and Powell. Powell really struggles against spin, even though he's improved. But I think instead of Delhi getting Phil Salt, them getting Honrich Klaasen uh, would have been much better. And the other problem is, I don't think that they have a backup Indian keeper, which they had in 2021 and in 2022, with Vishnu Vinod being that player in 2021 and KS Bharat being that player in 2022. So
Mhm.
I think that they have done nothing to improve their backups or their balance, and I think they've had a shocker of a auction without a doubt.
Do you think that they could have you can not taken Manish Pandey and not taken Phil Salt, and they could have picked up KS Barat again or an Azharuddin or someone like that as a domestic keeper, and then
I
pick up a Zampa or a Adil Rashid or something instead as an overseas spin option?
I don't know why they even released KS Bharat, because he
Yeah.
only played one game for them, and in that season before he was actually doing a decent job for RCB. So
Mhm.
I don't understand why KS Bharat was let go in the first place. That is one. Whether they could have gone for Adam Zampa, maybe yes. I think the two overseas they had two overseas spots before going into the auction, and for me, one of the best players who could have fit in that squad were probably David Wiese or a Shanaka or maybe even a Sikandar Raza, because you needed someone who could provide you the big, because I still feel that Akshar's not a number 7.
Yeah.
uh, Maybe he's a number 7 when he's facing spin bowling or full length bowling, but against hard lengths, I don't think Akshar is the number 7 that you are looking for. What I see happening is that maybe Delhi will use someone like a Lalit Yadav or a Ripal Patel as an impact player. But then again, Lalit Yadav's batting hasn't been impressive,
Mhm.
and Ripal Patel hasn't gotten enough chances. So I don't think that they have enough quality Indian backups as well to make use of that impact rule quite well, unless they want to get an out and out bowler wherein they play both Sakaria, wherein they want to use both Sakaria and someone like Khalil Ahmed. And Khalil Ahmed's been injured. He's just recently had a surgery. So they have a lot of issues. I think they may not qualify for the playoffs once again.
And while we talk about Akshar Patel's batting, his bowling numbers were even not that great last season. I mean, he took 43 balls per wicket, which is nowhere near where you'd expect they would want him to be. Plus, as of now, like you guys have already stressed upon enough, absolutely no replacement or a backup for Rahman Powell, so they can't afford him to have a bad season. So yeah,
I
that's
think
that's that.
I
I think.
think I
Yeah.
think they might have to move. They might have to move someone like Mitchell Marsh at 5
Which
because
again,
of his game against pace. Because Pant as a finisher has not worked out. I don't expect Sarfaraz or Lalit Yadav or someone like Akshay Patel to work out as a finisher against pace. I think they'll have to do something similar with Mitchell Marsh, what they did with Stoinis in 2020 and 2021. It's been a pattern with DC. They've had 8 to 9 players who've essentially been top 3 players. Uh, and because Hetmeyer also wasn't a finisher before he came to DC. Hetmeyer was primarily batting 3 or 4 for West Indies. The season where Marcus Stoinis became a part of DC, he was opening for Melbourne Stars. So I think they'll be left with no option eventually if they start losing, wherein they'll have to move Mitchell Marsh at number 5.
So to summarize, DC's strategy is buy top order players and try to convert them into finishers.
and
Oh,
and and, and hope and hope that there are prayers which work out.
so prayers is the impact player for them, says the biggest DC fan of this panel. Moving on to the next side, and it's the favorite, dare I say. Avnish is not here; he's enjoying his vacation in Thailand. So, but we'll talk about RCB next, Dan. Again, similar to KKR, they did not have a lot of money going into the auction, so they did. They were not very active, but whatever business they did, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so they brought in 2 English players, Will Jackson and Reece Topley, as their 2 overseas additions. Perhaps not a shock given the fact that they've got an English analyst and someone else at the ECB who works with them as well. So perhaps not a huge shock there. I think Topley looks like a kind of either or for Josh Hazelwood. And Jax is someone I rate really, really highly in terms of his future upside, brutal hitting. His bowling, I think, will not go so well at this level. It was quite slow spin, and I'd be surprised if he was used as really an option apart from against 2 left-handers, for example. But I do think that it was wise to look to try and find the closest version of Glenn Maxwell, who isn't Glenn Maxwell, at the auction, given Maxwell's injury problems right now. So, if Maxwell doesn't make it, Jax comes in and they don't have a lot of disruption because they're extremely skilled players. So, for me, yeah, those 2 overseas picks made sense. They also, in my view, needed some more domestic batting strengths for those sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 roles in general. I'm not still a massive buyer of Anoj Rawat, for example. Patidar should probably start, I would have thought. Not a massive buyer at this stage of a Long Raw, for example, as well. So there's a lot of domestic holes, I think, in the batting group. So let's see how they structure up. We can't expect Dinesh Karthik to have such a good season as he did last year. I don't think that's completely unfair to expect that to happen again. So for me, domestically, this RCB top 7 looks fairly weak, and it'll be interesting to see. I think a lot's going to be asked of Faf, Virat, and Maxwell again to get competitive scores, because I just don't see where the runs are going to come from domestically.
So then one more point. Faf, Kohli, DK, and Shahbaz, who were regulars in the top 7, all of their hitting against spin is not even par, let alone above par. And I don't seem to think for a moment that they did anything to resolve that in this auction,
No,
because they are going to start again, but the game is not going to change.
and Jax's weakness is probably the ball turning away from him as well. So There is just another player who has a similar dynamic to a large extent, and yeah, I think this is where you're quite hamstrung by paying such a big percentage of your budget on a Kohli, on a Glenn Maxwell, and on a Faf. You're really struggling after that to compete in the market for certain skill sets. We know that spin hitting batters, and particularly domestic spin hitting batters, are pretty thin on the ground. So, in this auction, for example, perhaps obviously they wanted Mayank Agarwal, they bid on him, they didn't get him, and if they paid Kohli 5 crore less, maybe they could have got Mayank Agarwal as well. So do you know what I'm saying? So every decision that they take has a reaction to it, and by paying Kohli so much money with a clearly deficient skill set in that area, that has a knock-on effect.
So I think what you guys mentioned. I had these fears in the last season where I felt that Faf and Kohli weren't the ideal pairing for spin. But I think what RCB have gone for this time is they've looked at Faf's performance versus spin this year. Uh, this year against spin, I'm just bringing up some numbers. He averages 45.6 with a strike rate of 140.6. And what's even more fascinating is that against left arm spin, he's averaging 86 at a strike rate of 141.8. So I suppose somewhere they are hoping that Faf is able to replicate this in the next IPL, because he's done decently at CPL level as well, where you find pitches which grip a lot more than what they do in the IPL. I think that is one, and the other is they'd be hoping for Rajat Paridar to have a good season once again. Uh, the only issue that I felt was that they could have, like you said, they could have gone for another domestic batter who could have done well against spin. Maybe someone like the who's this player from Rajasthan have gone for this player, someone with the surname of Vashisht. I think it's Akash Vashisht. I'm not sure of the name,
Hmm.
but I think they could have gone for someone like him. Uh, Apart from that, my bigger issue with them is that. Uh, I think that they need to start looking for replacements for a lot of players, because they are on the wrong side of 30s now. Faf is 38, DK is 37, Kohli's turned 34, and these players are not getting younger. Even Maxwell's, I think around 32, and so I think they need to start looking for replacements of these players slowly and steadily, because I think replacing all of them together is not going to be possible. And teams at the auction are smart as well. They sometimes know what players you're going to go for, and they just start raising the paddle to mess with your plans.
Dan, would you like to take this question on Avinash Singh? We know that RCB released a video on how they scouted them. I mean, do you have any analysis behind his selection?
Yeah, so okay, it's interesting because I didn't do a big run production model that I did have for the 2022 mega auction, which I obviously worked with Punjab Kings. So I had literally every single domestic player who was on the list was quantified with an expected boundary percentage, expected uh, balls faced, balls run score, whatever it might be. A lot of different metrics. So I had so much fantastic information on whoever it was at any level. You could play as far down as Tamil Nadu League or something like that, and I would be able to model how that would look if they went up in level to the IPL. I don't know a lot about Avinash Singh, to be honest with you. I brought up some stuff here, but there's just not enough. He's played a couple of games, low level T20, and that's all I can really see. So, for me, he's a completely unknown quantity.
This is
All right.
one question that has come in, Dan, and I want to know your thoughts on this. Mihin Migoda is asking Hasaranga at 5 to counter spin.
Not for me. I actually think that the Hasaranga is not as good a batter as a lot of people think, and certainly not as a finisher, as his 6% is pretty low. And his balls per dismissal figure is extremely low, certainly for a number 5. So you're asking a lot of someone who's got, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's like 10 balls per dismissal or something like that to come in and bat number 5 for you is one, it's a lot to ask of the player, and two, it has knock-on effects for the team because you're going to have to pick an extra batter because you lose stability, and also the batters in your group have to rationalise the fact that you're picking a bowler at 5, so the wickets got less value. Personally, it's not a move I would do.
So while we talk about their struggles against spin, they were actually saved like last year by the introduction of Rajat Patidar in their squad, who went on to have a strike rate of 170 against spin. So probably they will be left with him again. They would want him to replicate that season. And Maxwell is currently injured, so that is another concern. If he doesn't turn up, that leaves them another batter short of someone who can actually bash spin.
One last question before we. Oh, sorry. I, you asked a question, right?
No, not really.
Oh, sorry. One question before we move on to the next team. Uh, I want to know this from both of you, not just Dan. How do you see someone like Harshal Patel at playing half the games at Chinnaswamy? Because uh, post him coming back from injury, he's actually gone for a lot of runs. I don't think his slower balls have got the dip that is required. And Chinnaswamy is one of the smallest grounds in the country. So, do you guys think that he can replicate the success of the two previous seasons, or do you think he's going to struggle at that stadium?
Maybe Dan, you can take that first.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, so I mean, look, I'm always a bit confused about Harshal Patel generally because I was never really a massive buyer of him before he had that stunning season a couple of years back where he took how was it about
30 wickets, 31.
Yeah, and then I looked at the wickets that he took, and it was, I think, a lot of sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 type of batters, and finished off a lot of tails and stuff like that. And yeah, you've got to take those wickets for sure, but how much value do they have compared to the top order wickets and stuff is another matter entirely. So I'm not. I think Harshal Patel is a decent bowler, but I'm not. I think he's still not premium quality at this level. As far as the pitch dimensions go, and the Chinnaswamy is a bowler's graveyard at the best of times. So it's not going to do him any favors at all. It's not going to do any bowlers any favors at all. I think the jury's out for me, really, to be honest with you.
So,
Fair enough.
I mean, in the last couple of seasons, he's not played a single game at Chinnaswamy. So we have a person called Shweta in our team who is a ex Mumbai women's cricketer, and she says that there is a saying that goes around in Mumbai circuit that if you're short of runs, go and play at Brabant. So just looking at Harshal Patel's IPL numbers in Brabant, and in 3 games he has had an economy of 8.6, so 8.7. So probably that gives us a window into closest window into his returns at Chinnaswamy. But yeah, I mean, I would not bet him not giving a lot of runs at Chinnaswamy given his latest form.
So I think,
Yeah, we can move to the next team.
yeah. So the next team I think is Lucknow Super Giants. Right?
Cool.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
It has to be Lucknow
LSE
Super
finished
Giants.
third. Yeah.
Now, Dan, what do you make of their auction? Because surprisingly, or maybe not so surprising, uh, but they went for someone like Amit Mishra, uh, maybe as a backup spinner or a backup wrist spinner. and they got someone like Daniel Sams. And what was surprising to me was that they chose to retain someone like Kyle Myers over Evan Lewis and Holder.
Yeah.
And they've gone for for one bowler which you actually rate quite a lot, who's Naveen ul Haq.
Mm.
So what do you make of their auction?
Yeah, I think they've kind of covered a bit of the gaps that they had last year. Actually, I certainly don't see it as a particularly bad auction for them. Look, um, I think Paran is grossly overpriced, but maybe that's the market right now. I think the T10 earned him a lot of money. Basically, playing so well in T10 earned him a lot of money. Um, uh, Last year, LSG had big problems with batting intent, particularly in the power play. So, just any players who can reinforce that would be beneficial. I don't see Puran batting that much in the power play, but it'll certainly improve on the intent side of things. And I also think that the acquisitions of Daniel Sams and Romero Shepherd, I don't think they'll play together, but one of them might play. Helps with the sort of death hitting as well a little bit too. So you can see why they've gone down those roads. What kind of makes a little bit of sense. I think they needed an overseas all rounder, so they picked up two. So that again, Shepherd's probably more of the bowling strong variety. Sam's more of a batting strong variety. I think that they ideally they needed a domestic batter, but they didn't really pick up anyone of proven quality. With the Amit Mishra pickup, is that maybe a nod to the impact substitution? The guys like him and Pash Chawla, veteran spinners being picked up that's something that teams are thinking about a little bit. And they also picked up Purat Mankad as well, who we've spoken about already. They can structure up a little bit differently with their overseas should they wish to do so. Naveen made a lot of sense to me for them to pick up. I think they needed the extra overseas pacer. Look, I know a lot about Naveen. He's a great guy, a very very humble man who wants to be the best bowler in cricket. Basically, he's just very very driven to achieve success, and he's a lot of people now view him as a kind of slower ball merchant, but he's a lot more than that. And I think maybe that's how he started out because he has so many varieties of slower balls. He got that reputation, but now I'd say over the last year he's probably put 5 kph on, and the difference between his stock ball and his slow ball is now quite a bit different. So he's got more of an element of surprise than he did have in 2021 when we first picked him up in England. And the good thing with him as well is that I've never met a bowler who's so intelligent as him in terms of opposition batters and their tendencies and field positions and stuff like that. The guy's got like a photographic of every batter that he's ever bowled against. So, for me, this $60,000, no brainer, absolute no brainer, and it's still just in mind that he wasn't put by Afghanistan in the World Cup until right near the end. It was very very strange. So I think I'm really excited to see how he gets on. Will he play? I don't know. I think maybe that's going to be a conducive a little bit on depending on Mark Wood's fitness. We've seen with Mark Wood being bought by various teams over the years, and then he hasn't been able to fulfil those commitments for various reasons. So that's gonna potentially change a lot as well. And then they also picked up Jaydev Vanadkat as well, which was I thought was going to go for a lot more money after sort of more of a high profile domestic season. But I think maybe teams were a little bit fearful based on Vanadkat's returns, say in IPLs of previous years.
Dan, one question before we take. Okay, let's take this question before we come to my question.
Yeah, Dan. So Dylan Vibes asks why LSG preferred Puran over Stokes when they had 23 crores.
Okay. My answer to that would be that they're completely different types of player. So with Puran, you've got a wicket keeper, left-hander, obviously both left-handers, but Puran is like a spin hitting genius, basically, like easily one of the best players of spin in the world. Stokes isn't that player. Obviously, Stokes offers a bowling option, but with, in my view, far less ability with the bat in T20 cricket. And so they're very, very different types of players, really. I don't think that LSG needed Stokes as much when they've already got Stoinis. They've already got, even though it was a bit of a curious retention, they've got Carl Mayers, they've got Sams, they've got Romario Shepherd now, they've got Perak. They don't need Ben Stokes. This is probably one franchise that he just doesn't really make any sense for. So yeah, I can understand LSG's mentality there with picking up Puran. But like I say, ridiculous price, but maybe that's the market. These mini auctions is quite incredible.
Dan, last season, LSG had the most expensive economy rate, 11.14 in the last 5 overs,
Mm.
and even in the power play, there they had the second most expensive economy rate. Uh,
Yes.
how do they fix that? Because I thought Avesh didn't really have the kind of season that he should have had. Uh, do you think if Mark would plays the entire season, maybe that can be corrected?
I think Naveen would be a big benefit there. So at Leicester, when I was working at Leicester, when we had Naveen, his nickname was the banker because he would always give us two banker overs at the death, and yeah, I think he would really improve their death bowling as well. I look at this and I think that I don't see Mark Wood as a death bowler though. So this is a nod to those problems that perhaps haven't been solved. Avesh Khan, as you say, was disappointing last year. I rated him really highly prior to the auction, and I thought he would go for a lot, and he did. Uh, Look, hopefully for them he can get back to his best levels. But yeah, if death bowling wise is certainly a question mark. I think for LSG moving forward, unless they pick the right combos, like I say, like a Naveen or something, because they can go with like a Sams, but Sams bowls death a lot, but he's very, very expensive at the death. His boundary is not good at all. So they've got players who can bowl the face, but are mediocre performers in that phase. And so yeah, that's probably a red flag going into the tournament, I think.
I think they have a couple of more problems because Mohsin Khan hasn't played a single professional or
Yep.
competitive game since the eliminator. He's been out with injuries since then. And then I think I think Bishnoi might just try and be a traditional leggy, which he isn't. Because last season he had an economy rate of 8.19, and he averaged nearly 30. So I hope that they don't try and mess so much or try and tinker so much with the way and the normal trajectory of someone like Bishnoi, because I think if they try and make him into uh, a traditional spinner, which I think they might try, and when you are a 20-year-old, you're quite impressionable as well. I think that might just backfire quite badly for them.
Yeah, yeah. No, I rate Bishnoi highly. I just want to see him. You don't mess with how he his how his game plan broke as he broke through when he was playing for PBKs early. He was fantastic. There's no need to change that. The other question that I look at with LSG is with the batting a little bit. We know that KL Rahul is polarizes opinion, shall we say, as an opener with his approach. Until recently, we haven't seen Deepak Hooda really be an intense merchant. Ayush Badoni had a low boundary percentage last season. And Pandya's boundary percentage is going downhill as well. Is that a problem?
I think their bigger problem will be to get the entry points correct, because they really did not utilize someone like Marcus Stoinis with the bat. I think out of the 100, he faced only 110 balls in the in the season last time. And I think out of the 110 balls, 82 of them probably came in the last 5 overs. So I think they need to utilize that better. And obviously with KL Rahul, they need a lot more in the power play. His strike rate in the power play has progressively come down from let me just get the numbers. It was it was 124.6 in 2020. It was 115 in 2021, and it was 103.6 last season. And the worst part is that his average also came down in the power play. It was 33.8, and he had a pretty poor record while batting second. So they definitely need to get a lot more from him with the bat.
Yeah,
Hmm.
he's got to find a way of doing things a lot
Yeah.
differently.
And I think this wicket preservation mindset is what led to them underutilizing some of the hitters they had uh, last season. I mean,
Yep.
even when they did not face a lot of balls, LSG did end up having the highest run rate in the death overs. So maybe I mean the case of KL Rahul is now it's pretty obvious to everyone except maybe KL Rahul himself. With that, we'll move to the two finalists and we'll start with RR. So Dan Gurkirat, one clear hole in their team last season was that number 7 spot, and they needed an all-rounder to sort of fill that role. And with I think Jason Holder is someone who just fit perfectly in that spot. They've also bought a couple of key players at very cheap price. I may add they ended up getting Adam Zampa and also
Donovan
Donovan
Ferreira.
Ferreira, who actually in cricket.com's impact index was had the second highest impact in the recently concluded SA T20 league after Devol Bravis. So your thoughts, Dan, on their picks?
And before we go to Dan, I know Dan actually doesn't feel that Joe Root's a T20 player, uh, and he has his reasons. But I still think that someone like Joe Root at 1 crore is an upgrade over a Kane Williamson or a Steven Smith, given the fact that he also bowls
Mhm.
and his range against spin is better than both the batters.
Okay, so yeah. First of all, to address that, look, I'm not Joe Root's biggest fan in T20 cricket. That's fair to say. Just primarily on his range of shots and boundary intent for me is not there. However, when you're comparing him to Steve Smith or Kane Williamson, the current versions of, I would still take Joe Root over those guys as well. Particularly, I think he's got greater intent than Williamson and is a useful, as you say, bowling option against left-hander or left right combo with the right hand, not being a particularly good player of spin. So yeah, this you can understand the logic behind that, and certainly I'd much rather have Root at 1 crore than Williamson at 2 crore, definitely, and I would rather have Root at the same price as well. What I mean, look, I think RR. Didn't really have a lot to do at auction because I looked at their numbers in detail from last year, and there wasn't really any areas that they struggled with markedly. The two things that I felt that they were a little bit fortunate on was that one was that Josh Butler had this unbelievable start to the tournament, and that's never going to be able to be replicated again. I would have thought so. A lot was on him, and I think it would be unrealistic and unfair to expect him to have such an impact again this year and this coming tournament, I should say. And as you mentioned, Gokrat as well, this batting depth was just really lacked balance with like an Ashwin at 7, and then sometimes he like pinch blocked or whatever it was that you describing it as, people describe it as, and so the pickup of Jason Holder made complete sense, and yeah, you can completely understand why they went for Jason Holder, and he looks like he's going to provide them with so much more balance. So I think big thumbs up there. The interesting thing was that they went so hard on Harry Brook that they almost bankrupted themselves in the process, and would have if their last bid of I think it was 13 CR on Brook was successful, they only had 20 lakh to spend on one player to make the minimum squad size up, and they would have only had 5 overseas as well. So look, I'm sure that I've sort of seen comments made by the management of Rajasthan after this saying, it was all part of the plan and stuff. But let me tell you, I'm not sure they would have released any videos of their team discussion. They were left with 20 Larker with 15 players in their squad. I don't
But
think.
but I really want to understand from someone like you who's been at the auction table. Uh, I thought it was also too early for a panic buy. I mean,
Mhm.
I just want to understand that what could have been going through their mind while trying to make that purchase, because they knew they needed number 7. I mean, they very badly needed one off holder, or maybe a Daniel Sams or a Vize or a Shanaka to be there in their squad. Like, what was even going on at that point of time? Like, did they forget the budget that they have, or did they wanted to mess with SRH because they knew SRH have the budget, and probably they had some inside information that SRH would definitely go for it? Because it's quite absurd, to say the least, that a team which has only 13.225 crores is going after a player for 13 crores. uh, when they had when they had at least 4 5 spots to fill, and 3 overseas, or probably 4 overseas to buy. So what
Yeah.
was happening there?
Okay, so we've spoken about risk v reward a few times in this show so far. Something I talk about a lot. And look, getting a rival team who are only rivals in a sense of they're playing the same league as you right now, because Sunrisers haven't been rivals to anyone over the last couple of years. Let's face facts. Getting a rival team to pay half a crore more for a player, but risking screwing your whole auction up in set one at the process is not a great risk reward proposition. I just don't. It's mind blowing in terms of how that was perceived to be a good idea. And like I said, now Sunrisers did go for the extra bid. They can go around and say, well, it was always our strategy. We knew they were going to go for it, but I mean, it's a horrible strategy. It really, really is. And like I say, you risk screwing your whole auction up in the first set just to try and make someone pay a little bit more for one player. It's just absurd. And just for me, it makes no sense. Now, we'll talk about other auctions. I mean, sometimes I did feel that there's not always that much awareness and not just in auctions where obviously you've got to juggle a pot of money, which you, as opposed to like a draft where you've got specific salary bands and stuff like that. But sometimes you do see examples of teams they forget that they've got to go and buy a certain type of player, or I mean, look, Rajasthan did it a bit last year. They right at the end of the auction, they were like, "Oh right, yeah, we've only got 4 overseas players," so we just scattergun bought 4 overseas players at the end who kind of they all released after the tournament, and so yeah, this stuff does happen. I mean, sometimes I do think that kind of journalists, supporters, whoever it might be, fans on social media, whatever. I do think sometimes they give teams a little bit too much credit for how professional and how well organised they are. I'm not saying that the Rajasthan aren't professional or well organised. I'm just saying that on a general basis, sometimes too much credit is given to teams for being well organised and professional. They do make mistakes.
Hmm.
Before we move on to the next team, uh, one question. Actually, Anirudh has made quite a good comment, and they do have a lot of backups for sure.
Mm.
The one question that I have for you is that you said that they probably didn't have much to do, but I think it was something that they lacked in the last auction as well, and they lack it this time as well. They don't have a reliable death bowler. Uh, they,
Yes,
they tried with Prasidh Krishna, and he was successful in a few games, but I don't think he's a reliable death bowler yet. He's
no,
not your 2-2 bowler. You
very
may try
consistent.
to make him,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's something that will work out.
No, I agree. And
Hmm.
it's hard to get Obed McCoy into a team when you've already got Trent Bolt as well. So, Yeah, and that's an issue. So my notes for them prior to the auction were the obvious all rounder at 7 and plus a high quality overseas pacer who wasn't acquired. So you look at like the low priced overseas pacers and you think maybe someone like a Naveen or a Jai Richardson or someone like that would have been a smart pickup.
Hmm.
Also,
And
recent form of okay, Sumesh, you speak.
no, I was just saying that while the bowlers did a good job in power play of controlling runs and taking wickets as well, with Chahel's and Ashwin's presence, this sort of went under the radar. But they were actually the worst wicket-taking side in middle overs. This was largely due to Ashwin not even picking a wicket every game. His balls per wicket record in last season was 33.5, and even economy was 7.5, which is not elite of that of Sunil
But he
Narayan.
was
At times
but he
doesn't
was
pick
bowling in
wickets.
the power play. He was bowling in the power play. Ashwin was
Yeah,
was was bowling in the power play.
I won't be surprised if in this season they might try to swap one Ashwin with the other, and they have actually bought a few backups in that role.
They also have Zampa.
Yeah,
Anyway, I think we should now move on to the defending champions. And
and the theme which makes no sense but still makes a lot of sense. So we're of course talking
and they
about
began
Gujarat.
and they began their auction with that kind of a buy.
Yeah,
they,
of course. I mean,
they
and not
went
just
for
that. There is
Jimmy
one
Wilson.
key player I really want to know Dan's thoughts on, because I'm sure he would have analyzed him as well. We will come to that. We're talking about Gujarat Titans, yeah, Dan, and clearly their approach was pretty different to what you preach. Their overall batting was of the wicket preservation mindset, but they did well on the bowling front and sort of covered their
Yeah,
the delta and ended up having a positive boundary percentage record, if I'm correct. But your thoughts on their auction?
yeah. Look, I think that last year we saw that they were such a stability orientated batting lineup, as you say, Samesh, that they were maybe the opposite approach to the one that I advocate. Um, and I wondered if it was by accident or design. I think it's very difficult sometimes to work that out in year one when there's a complete revamp of squads and stuff. Um, the fact that they went straight in and bought Kane Williamson in lot number one shows that maybe it is more by design than accident that they've gone for this kind of very stability orientated approach. Now, I do think that Kane Williamson's now the current version of Kane Williamson has so much to prove as to being even an average IPL player right now. I mean, the strike rates in very recent tournaments or World Cups as well just really just don't show any confidence that he's going to contribute in a positive expected value manner at all. And that's, I mean, they said they were going to prepare to pay more for him. I mean, I just don't understand it. Um, I don't know what you guys think about that because it's for me it was just baffling. And they didn't do anything to kind of go down that intent merchant route at all with Kes Barat as well coming in, and he's a solid player, but he's not he's a 130 135 strike rate player rather than a real out and out hitter. So they didn't look to change they haven't looked to change what they did in year one. And like I say, I think that's looking like it's more by design than accident. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested. Yeah, as I say, I'm interested to hear what you guys think about Williamson in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep on mentioning that name that I've mentioned once before as well. I think at once today and quite a few times before in the earlier videos. I mean, instead of Ken Williamson, might as well spend that money on Will Smith. I mean, at least you have someone for the future. And I don't see Williamson in the starting 11 anyway. The other player that I'm always baffled by in the number of bids that he receives. Okay, yeah, before we move to that player,
Another
let's
factor,
hear from Gurkirat. Yeah.
another factor with the Will Smith kind of a buy is that he's already given up first class cricket. So
Yeah.
there is no factor of him skipping the IPL to play first class cricket to maybe make himself available for the Ashes. He's already given up
Hmm.
first class cricket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The other player that baffles me every time I see a lot of teams bid on him is Shivam Mavi. Dan, do you know something that maybe I don't, or even Gurkirat maybe? I mean, enlighten me. That there are players like Sandeep Sharma and Ishan Purel who went unsold, and here we have a bidding war for Shivam Mavi year after year.
I think it's got to do with a few things. One is the sort of the hype from when he was a lot younger, say under 19 level, and also the fact that there's such a scarcity of resources in terms of domestic pacers and, or if you want to bracket it a bit more specifically, domestic pacers who people think have a fairly high ceiling. You can, I guess I can see it from that perspective. And this is why I go back. I know it's obviously it's most domestic dynamic. But this is why I think that Lockie Ferguson will still have gone for quite a lot in an auction, because there's just not the resources out there to expect that you're going to get bargains in the premium pacer market or the semi-premium pacer market. And we've also saw that, I think, here with Josh Little as well. I mean, Josh Little was someone who's impressed me so much this year. Like I watched him play T10 quite a lot last winter, and I felt that he had a lot of work still to do. But this year he's really kicked on. But even so, 4.4 crore first IPL tournament for a guy who's doesn't really play against good teams on a regular basis for his national team. That shows you again. That's the market.
So
I have one point to make before I leave, and I am sorry that I have to leave just 4 or 5 minutes before we end. I think they have pretty much a backup for every position except for maybe Hardik's. Even for Rashid Khan, they do have another Afghanistan left arm
Noor
spinner
Ahmed,
in Noor
yeah.
Ahmed, who was there last time as well. Uh, I think that despite them winning the title last time, their combination wasn't ideal. You can't have Rashid at 7. I think Rashid at 7 is a spot too high. So is Tewatia at 6. I hope that they do play an extra batter and then bring in their bowlers as an impact player.
Yeah.
Also, I think if say Miller is not fit, not available, or has poor form, then they can also move someone like Wade from number 3 or number 4 to the position of David Miller. And on this note, I'd like to take the leave of both of you and our viewers. I am really sorry, guys, that I have to leave. Something has just come up, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And those who are watching, just please press the like button and share it with your friends who are IPL fanatics or IPL fans, and do subscribe to the channel.
Thanks, Kukia. So, Dan, before we sort of end this show, I just have one last question to ask you regarding GT, and this is something that has come that I thought about as well. We keep on discussing about how Pakistan's team is structured, where they don't hit a lot of boundaries, but they prevent a lot of boundaries as well. Do you see some similarities, as Anirudh goes on to ask?
Yeah, I think that that's the design that they've tried to go down, the template, if you like, that they're trying to adopt. Look, that's definitely always possible when you've got Rashid Khan in your team. I think Saika Shaw's domestic numbers are magnificent in terms of boundary prevention as well. Joseph is, I think, a bit unproven still at this level. Shami is decent but not spectacular. So look, I think that they have something to do still in that area. I don't see that they have the overall level of bowling quality that Pakistan have, but I definitely agree with Anurad's kind of broad point on that template for sure. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how their bowlers perform. I think it's going to be absolutely key for them. And also, I think how teams will adapt to their strategy. So year one, it's you can understand that they've gone for a fairly cautious batting strategy, one that's in the end has won them a lot of fine margins of volatile situations where the game could easily have gone the way of the opposition. There was probably 5 or 6 instances of that happening. and it's difficult to sustain that. I look at the batting and I think it's not great. It doesn't really inspire me. But you can never write off a team with Rashid Khan in it as well at the same time. Look, I said last year, if it was a 38-game season like the English Premier League in football, I don't think they'd have qualified. I'll stand by that. I think that they might get if teams are efficient and they plan better. It's becoming more obvious now that this is GT's modus operandi, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
They plan better and combat that. I think they could struggle.
So Dan, just before we go, I know I asked you ahead of the show to rate all the squads. Maybe if you're ready.
Right. Okay. I think I'm gonna go. Do we go bottom? Okay. Okay. What? I'm gonna go RR first.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go. Heart overhead. Punjab in second with Sam Curran making a massive difference. I think that LSG have recruited pretty well, and I can see them coming in the top 4 as well. And then I think ultimately from there, I think it's really there's such a small gap between all teams. I think that the DC, if they had a better auction, I would have really fancied them to bounce back, but they didn't. CSK, I'm not inspired by, but we know what CSK do, and Dhoni.
And they have the Dhoni touch.
Yeah, can we get another year of genius out of him? I've just kind of spoken about Gujarat and how I think variance is going to bite them back this year. KKR were I still think that they kind of got a lot of work to do still in their recruitment perspective, and I'm not sure that they're going to be able to change a lot from last year to this with their batting. MI have got a team of ones rather than an 11. RCB still too reliant on marquee batters, and SRH have got a lot of catch-up work to do, but they might well do it because they want the better auctions. So yeah, I mean, look, I think RR, PBKs, SB, 3 of the top 4. Everyone else fight for the rest of the other spots.
Awesome. So we have potentially 4 to 5 other teams fighting for that last spot. In Dan's opinion. So Dan, thanks a lot for making time for this. This is our longest episode till date, but it was totally worth it. And thanks everyone who joined us. Please subscribe to the channel. Please forward it to your friends. Ask them to subscribe as well. And do download the cricket.com app. Like I said, we did a recent interview with Sandeep Sharma where he expressed his disappointment of not getting a bid, and you'd find more such pieces on the app and website. So do download, do share it with your friends. Dan, have a good day and a very happy new year to you and everyone who was with us today.
Thanks so much. It's been fantastic to do this, and happy new year to everybody, and we'll catch up soon.
Sure, cool. Bye-bye.